My name is Runar Lie. So I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Oslo. Um, I'm one of those late bloomers in international law. I started my law career quite late in life. Um, I was a computer scientist before I became a lawyer. Um, I did my master's and doctorate at the University of Oslo. Um, and I quite early started looking at international investment law. It was kind of an odd thing. Being a computer scientist, I once was in a class with um, my supervisor, or who would later become my supervisor, um, Daniel Ben and Malcolm Langford. And they talked about that they had a database. And as a computer scientist, I heard like, oh, database. That sounds fun. And this database was something called the PITA database. It's a database of investment arbitration decisions. And I thought, okay, this could be super interesting. So I started working on that. And I started working on trying to figure out, okay, who actually has influence and power in the international investment law system. And doing this through my master's, and then after a while, a PhD, I started working on who, when, and where does influence come from in the international investment law system. And I figured, okay, we can perhaps use computers to do this. And this is my sort of area of expertise and what I like to do. I like to try to figure out, okay, how can we look at a legal system? In this case, what I've been working on primarily is international investment law. And see if we can figure out what happens by sort of looking at all the data. So I try to figure out, okay, who decides in the international investment law system, who does innovation, who comes up with new ideas, and particularly when, because we talk a lot about who decides, but that who is also has a temporal factor. So I have a great interest of this, and I also have a great interest of generally looking at how can we as researchers use the new technologies and tools that we have at our disposal to figure out more about the legal systems that we investigate. So teaching computers to read is a great way of doing this. And this is what I love to do in my research. And it's also slightly convenient because it means I have to read less and my computer can read more. So currently I'm working on a multitude of different projects. I am working on continuing the investment investigation together with a large group of colleagues looking at compliance in international law. But I'm also expanding my research now into new areas of law, including asylum law, to see if we can use the same ideas of looking at large amounts of data, and especially texts, try to figure out, okay, what's really going on? How is the law being practiced? So my first experience at ESIL was in Athens in 2019, and I was only there as an audience member. So my first thought is how large the conference was, how many people. The audience was filled up the entire ceremonial hall of the university, and as far as I can recall, there was hardly any sitting room left. I think people were standing. And I remember this thought that, oh, wow, there's so many people, so many clever people working on international law. And coming from the University of Oslo, where we have a very good international law department, it was still amazing just seeing how many people were working on all these different aspects of international law. And I always remember the variety back then. I remember attending a session on space law, and I thought, wow, is this really something you can work with? And it was amazing. And part of that amazingness was also just how exceptionally qualified the people who were presenting were. This was also very early in my career, so this is the first time I attended such a big conference. And the willingness of all the participants to talk with me about my research, hearing about theirs, was just an amazing experience because you got so many different perspectives from different people. And it really helped both correct some of the views I had. It really shaped and formed me both as a researcher and research itself. And I think it would be very different if I hadn't gone to that conference. So it was truly an amazing thing. And it was not just about the conference itself, but also meeting fellow researchers and understanding what they were working on. This year's experience was quite different. I presented this year for the first time at the Interest Group for International Economic Law with one of the papers I had written for my PhD originally. And it was such a wonderful experience to get these people who are so much more qualified than I am and have such broad experience and expertise within the field to actually get feedback on the things I was working on. And this sort of warped into the rest of the conference as well. It was a sort of feeling of meeting old friends. You kept meeting new people. The first time I was at the ESIL conference, every introduction was new. But this year, it was meeting people I met previously in other settings at previous ESIL. It was quite a wonderful experience. And this expanded a bit further as I was very honored and humbled by receiving the ESIL Young Scholar Prize as well. And one of the wonderful effects of that was that I got to talk to a lot of people that I wouldn't have normally talked to, both about my research and theirs, and sort of understanding, okay, the things I'm doing could be inspired by their work. And perhaps some of the methods I'm using can inspire theirs. It was such a wonderful experience to meet people in a very different field than I am. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about the European Society of International Law, and especially these sort of conferences where we all come together, regardless of whether we're working on human rights or if we're working on international investment arbitration like I am, or international courts. We can sort of all come together and talk about our research and see it from different perspectives and different research traditions. And it was quite the wonderful thing to attend this year and be a part of that. So I guess the message I would have for the ESIL members is basically attend the ESIL meeting and events. They are fabulously organized, and being there, attending, presenting your work, talking about your work, listening to other people's presentations and giving them your thoughts on their work as well is just an amazing experience. And it, at least for me, it has always contributed greatly to my thoughts and thinking on both my own subject, but also understanding what is really moving at the research front. What are the important questions? And just reading articles or books doesn't give you that sort of understanding of what's going on in international law. ESIL does that. And it's also such a wonderful place to meet people who are working on the same thing you are, having social events with them, making friends, and meeting people who are so experienced, who truly understand the very fabric of what is international law, and actually being able to have a coffee with them, listening to their very thoughtful papers, presentations, and debates. And I think you can only get that by attending these events, meetings, and of course, the annual meeting, which is the most wonderful of them all.